The courthouse hallways echoed with the sharp, arrogant click of expensive leather shoes. My soon-to-be ex-husband, Ethan Blake, walked through the heavy mahogany double doors of the family court like a conquering king entering a newly vanquished territory. He was wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit that he couldn't actually afford, his hair perfectly coiffed, a smug, victorious smile plastered across his face. Clinging to his left arm was Tara Wells. She was 24 years old, a former receptionist at Ethan's high-end gym, and heavily, visibly pregnant. She was wearing a tight designer maternity dress, deliberately rubbing her swollen belly to ensure everyone in the hallway knew exactly who had won. Trailing closely behind them, acting as the royal guard to this pathetic procession, were Ethan's parents, Camille and Victor Blake. Camille was dressed like she was attending a highly exclusive country club luncheon, holding her designer handbag like a shield. She looked at me, sitting quietly on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, and actually sneered. She wasn't treating this like a divorce proceeding where her son was destroying a 10-year marriage and abandoning his 2 children. She was treating it like a coronation. I didn't react. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly in the lap of my understated navy blazer. "Nora," Ethan said, stopping a few feet away from me. He didn't look at me with any guilt or remorse. He didn't seem to care that we had spent a decade building a life together. He looked at me with profound, absolute condescension. "I'm glad you decided not to make a scene today." I looked up at him. "I just want this to be over, Ethan." "Good," Camille chimed in, stepping forward, her voice dripping with lethal, aristocratic poison. "Because the Blake family has a very important afternoon planned. We are going to the VIP maternity clinic immediately after the judge signs the papers. Tara is getting her high-resolution ultrasound. We are finally going to see the new heir to the Blake legacy." She intentionally emphasized the word heir. It was a direct, vicious insult aimed at my 2 children, 7-year-old Milo and 5-year-old Ivy, who were currently sitting safely with a nanny at a playground across town. Camille had never liked my children because she had never liked me. She thought I was beneath them. She thought I was a waste of Ethan's potential because I didn't care about country club memberships or driving European sports cars. Tara giggled, leaning her head against Ethan's shoulder. "I'm just so excited to see our little angel. Ethan is going to be such a perfect father. He's already picked out the nursery colors." I looked at Tara. She genuinely believed she had won the lottery. She thought she had stolen a wealthy, powerful executive who was going to shower her with millions. She thought she was marrying into untouchable Boston elite. I didn't correct her. I let her live in her delusion. My lawyer, a quiet, highly efficient man, stepped out of the courtroom and motioned for us to enter. We sat down in front of the judge. The divorce was highly contested, primarily because Ethan had initially tried to claim half of my personal savings, while simultaneously trying to kick me out of the house. But today, Ethan's incredibly expensive, aggressive lawyer slapped a new, heavily drafted document down on the table with a loud smack. "Your Honor," Ethan's lawyer announced proudly, puffing out his chest, "my client is prepared to offer a highly unusual, completely expedited settlement. In the interest of starting his new life without any lingering financial entanglements, Mr. Blake is willing to sign a full, irrevocable waiver of his parental rights to Milo and Ivy Quinn." The judge frowned, leaning forward over the bench, looking at Ethan with sheer disbelief. "A full waiver. He is relinquishing all legal and physical custody of his 2 children." "Yes, Your Honor," the lawyer confirmed smoothly. "Mr. Blake will have no visitation, no custody, and no legal authority over the minors. He will surrender all decision-making power regarding their education, medical care, and residency. In exchange, he demands that Ms. Quinn waive any and all rights to spousal alimony and explicitly waive all current and future child support obligations." It was the most breathtakingly selfish, deeply narcissistic legal maneuver I had ever seen. Ethan wanted a clean slate. He wanted to focus all of his energy, his supposed wealth, and his family's attention on the new baby Tara was carrying. He viewed Milo and Ivy as financial liabilities, expensive anchors dragging down his new, flashy lifestyle. He was literally offering to throw his living, breathing children in the trash to save himself $3,000 a month in child support. He thought this was a brilliant, predatory move. He thought he was trapping me. Ethan leaned back in his chair, looking at me with a sickening smirk. "You're a starving artist, Nora," Ethan whispered across the table, his voice laced with cruelty. "You draw freelance doodles for a living. Without my salary, you're going to drown. You're going to lose the house. But you want the kids, right? You want to play the martyr? Fine. Take them. But you don't get a dime of my money. Good luck paying rent with your little colored pencils." Camille, sitting in the gallery, nodded in absolute approval. She had spent 10 years mocking my career. I am a medical illustrator. I don't draw freelance doodles. I possess master's degrees in anatomy and fine art. I meticulously map complex surgical procedures, cellular structures, and neurological pathways for top-tier medical textbooks and international research institutes. Recently, I had mapped the exact surgical approach for a revolutionary pediatric heart surgery that was adopted by Johns Hopkins. It is a highly specialized, incredibly lucrative field. But Ethan, a man who sold enterprise software and measured success purely by the logo on his car, couldn't comprehend a career that didn't involve wearing a suit to a corporate office. To him, because I worked from a home studio and wore comfortable clothes, I was unemployed. I looked at the legal document sitting on the table. It was a full, irrevocable waiver of parental rights. Once the judge stamped it, Ethan Blake would be a legal stranger to my children. He would have zero say in where they lived, where they went to school, or what country they resided in. He was handing me the ultimate, untouchable legal shield, thinking he was handing me a death sentence. "Miss Quinn," the judge asked gently, clearly disgusted by Ethan's behavior, "do you understand the terms of this agreement? If you sign this, you will receive absolutely no financial support from Mr. Blake to raise these children. Are you sure you are financially capable of accepting this burden?" I picked up the pen. I didn't hesitate. I didn't let my hand shake. I didn't beg Ethan to reconsider his role as a father. "I am entirely capable, Your Honor," I said, my voice completely steady. I signed the document. Ethan let out a quiet sigh of relief. He high-fived his lawyer under the table. He actually believed he had just financially outsmarted me. He thought he had cut off dead weight and secured his entire massive salary for Tara and the new baby. The judge stamped the final divorce decree, severing our marriage and legally erasing Ethan from my children's lives. We walked out of the courtroom. "Well," Camille said loudly, brushing past me in the hallway, "I suppose you'll have to move into a smaller apartment now, Nora. Maybe in a worse school district. Such a shame you couldn't keep a husband. Come along, Ethan. We have a VIP ultrasound to attend. We need to see the real future of this family." Ethan didn't even look back at me. He put his arm around Tara's waist and walked out the front doors, completely abandoning the family he had built for a younger, flashier upgrade. I watched them leave. I didn't cry. I felt a massive, invisible chain fall off my chest. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. "Alistair," I said when the call connected. "The papers are signed. The judge stamped the parental waiver. He has zero legal rights. Brilliant, Alistair Crow, my incredibly expensive, highly connected international lawyer," replied from his office in London. "The geopolitical boundaries are entirely clear. I have the international restraining orders prepared and ready to file the moment he attempts contact. Is your transport ready?" "Yes," I replied, walking swiftly toward the courthouse exit. "I'm picking up the kids now." Ethan thought I was a starving artist. He thought I was going to struggle to pay rent in a bad school district in Boston. He didn't know that 3 weeks ago, my freelance doodles had secured me a 5-year, multi-million-dollar exclusive contract as the lead anatomical architect for the Caledon Medical Research Institute in Scotland. They had aggressively recruited me to map a revolutionary new series of cardiothoracic surgical procedures. They had provided a massive signing bonus, a luxury penthouse in the heart of Glasgow, and fully paid tuition for Milo and Ivy at the most prestigious international academy in the country. I wasn't moving to a smaller apartment. I was moving to Europe as a millionaire. An hour later, a private black SUV pulled up to the curb at Logan International Airport. Milo and Ivy were sitting in the back seat, happily eating snacks, clutching their backpacks. They didn't know their father had just signed them away to save a few $1,000s. They just knew we were going on a massive, exciting adventure to a new country. I handed my passport to the Delta business class check-in agent. "Checking in for 3 to Glasgow, via Amsterdam," I said smoothly. The agent printed the boarding passes and handed them back with a warm smile. We walked through security and settled into the quiet luxury of the International Departure Lounge. We had an hour before our flight boarded. I pulled out my phone one last time to check my emails before I permanently deleted my American eSIM card and completely severed all digital ties to my past. An automated notification popped up in my inbox. It was an alert from the premium, high-tier family health insurance portal. Because Ethan was an arrogant idiot who never handled any household administration, he had completely forgotten that I was still the primary account holder on the health insurance plan he was using to fund Tara's prenatal care. The notification was simple. Alert: confidential NIPT, non-invasive prenatal testing. Genetic results have been securely transferred to Dr. Adrian Moss at the Elite Maternity Clinic. I stared at the notification. Right now, Ethan, Tara, Camille, and the rest of the deeply toxic Blake family were sitting in a luxurious waiting room, sipping sparkling water, waiting for Dr. Moss to come in and proudly read the results of the baby's genetic health screening. They were waiting to celebrate their perfect, pure-blooded heir. I smiled. It was a cold, incredibly satisfied smile. I tapped the screen, opened my phone settings, and permanently deleted the eSIM profile. The cellular signal immediately dropped to 0. I was officially a ghost. I picked up our bags, grabbed my children's hands, and walked toward the boarding gate. "Come on, guys," I said cheerfully. "Let's go home." While I was soaring over the Atlantic Ocean, drinking premium champagne in a lie-flat business class seat, thousands of miles away in Boston, the Blake family was walking blindly into an absolute biological massacre. The Elite Maternity Clinic in downtown Boston didn't look like a medical facility. It looked like the lobby of a 5-star luxury hotel. The waiting room featured plush velvet seating, a cascading indoor waterfall, and a complimentary champagne and espresso bar. It was specifically designed for people like the Blake family, people who believed that wealth should automatically insulate them from the unpleasant realities of biology. Ethan had rented out the entire VIP ultrasound suite for the afternoon. It was a massive, softly lit room with a huge flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall so the entire family could watch the ultrasound live. The entire Blake clan had assembled for the event. Victor Blake, Ethan's father, stood near the door, checking his expensive watch, looking mildly bored but dutifully present. Grant Blake, Ethan's older brother and the family's aggressive golden boy, who worked in corporate finance, was leaning against the wall, sipping a cappuccino. Grant was wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars, radiating a sense of untouchable arrogance. And then there was Sloane. Sloane was Ethan's younger sister. She was sharp, highly educated, and incredibly protective of the family image. Standing next to her was her husband, Marcus Reed. Marcus was a handsome, quiet man of African-American descent who worked as a high-end commercial real estate broker. He always seemed slightly uncomfortable at these massive Blake family gatherings, usually choosing to stand quietly in the background holding his wife's purse. He was treated like an accessory by the Blakes, tolerated but never truly embraced. Today, Marcus looked particularly pale and sweaty. He kept checking his phone and avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. Camille Blake was in her absolute element. She had hired a professional videographer to document the entire appointment for her social media vlog. She was constantly directing the cameraman, making sure he captured the perfect angles of Tara sitting on the examination bed. She wanted the entire world to see how perfect her family was. "Make sure you get the monitor in the background," Camille instructed the cameraman, holding a glass of sparkling cider. "I want my followers to see the exact moment we meet the newest Blake heir. It's going to be so precious. A new generation of perfection, Tara sat on the edge of the examination bed, wearing a silk hospital gown, looking incredibly smug. Ethan stood next to her, holding her hand, puffing out his chest for the camera. He had literally just abandoned his 2 existing children in a courthouse an hour ago. But he was acting like the proudest, most devoted father on earth. The heavy oak door opened, and Dr. Adrian Moss walked into the room. Dr. Moss was a highly respected, deeply experienced obstetrician who catered to Boston's elite. He was used to dealing with demanding, arrogant families. But today, as he walked into the VIP suite holding a thick manila folder, he didn't look confident. He looked incredibly pale, uncomfortable, and deeply tense. He stopped when he saw the professional cameraman filming him. "Ah, Mr. Blake," Dr. Moss said, his voice tight. He completely ignored Camille's bright, vlogging smile. He looked directly at Ethan. "If I could perhaps speak with you and Ms. Wells privately for a moment in my office. Just the 2 of you." "Nonsense," Camille interrupted loudly, stepping in front of the camera, waving her hand dismissively. "We are a family. Dr. Moss, we share everything. We're filming this for the baby's future memory book. Just read the results right here. We want to hear that what the baby is perfectly healthy and pure." Dr. Moss looked at Camille, then back to Ethan. "Mr. Blake, I highly recommend we discuss these results privately. The NEPT genetic screening is highly detailed, and there are some complexities. Complexities." Ethan frowned, his arrogance flaring up. He hated being told what to do in front of his family. "What kind of complexities? Is the baby okay?" "The fetus is perfectly healthy," Dr. Moss confirmed quickly. "Then read it," Ethan demanded, putting his arm around Tara. "My mother is paying you a fortune for this VIP package. Do your job, doctor. Read the genetic report. We want to know the gender." Dr. Moss let out a slow, heavy sigh. He opened the manila folder. He had tried to warn them. He had tried to give Ethan a chance to handle the impending explosion with dignity. But Ethan had demanded the public execution. "Very well," Dr. Moss said, his voice dropping to a serious, clinical tone. "The comprehensive NIPT panel screens for chromosomal abnormalities, genetic markers, and inherited traits. As I said, the fetus is developing normally. However, the genetic panel flagged a highly specific, dominant autosomal marker. The room went completely silent. The cameraman kept rolling. "What does that mean?" Victor Blake asked, stepping forward, his protective patriarchal instincts kicking in. "It means," Dr. Moss explains carefully, reading from the highly detailed lab report, "that the fetus is a carrier for the sickle cell trait." Ethan laughed. It was a short, confused, entirely dismissive sound. "Sickle cell?" Ethan scoffed, looking at the doctor like he was an idiot. "Doc, you must have the wrong file. Sickle cell is a genetic trait. Tara is Caucasian. I am Caucasian. Neither of us carries that trait. Nobody in the Blake family has that trait. Check the name on the file. You've mixed us up with some other family." Tara, sitting on the examination bed, suddenly stopped smiling. The color violently drained from her face. She looked like she was going to vomit. "I assure you, Mr. Blake, this is the correct file," Dr. Moss said, his voice remarkably steady despite the incredibly toxic environment. "The DNA sample was taken directly from Ms. Wells's blood last week. The lab ran the test twice to confirm the anomaly." "It's a false positive, then," Camille demanded angrily, stepping toward the doctor. "My son's bloodline is immaculate. You need to fire whatever incompetent lab technician ran this test." Dr. Moss didn't back down. He closed the folder and looked directly into Ethan's eyes. "It is not a false positive, Mr. Blake," Dr. Moss stated, delivering the absolute, undeniable biological truth. "The genetic profile of the fetus clearly indicates that the biological father possesses significant African ancestry. Specifically, the paternal DNA profile strongly correlates with genetic markers prevalent in West African demographics." The silence in the VI suite was so absolute, so suffocatingly heavy. It felt like all the oxygen had been instantly, violently sucked out of the room. No one moved. No one breathed. Ethan slowly turned his head and looked at Tara. Tara was shaking violently. Her hands were gripping the edges of the examination bed, so hard her knuckles were completely white. Tears were instantly welling in her eyes. She didn't deny it. She didn't scream that it was a mistake. She just looked absolutely, profoundly terrified. Tara, Ethan whispered, voice cracking, the arrogant CEO facade instantly shattering into a million pieces. Tara, what is he talking about? I don't, Tara stammered, hyperventilating, looking desperately around the room for an exit. Slowly, almost mechanically, the entire Blake family turned their heads. Camille, Victor, Grant, Sloane. They all turned and looked at the only person in the entire VIP suite who possessed the genetic profile the doctor had just described. They all looked at Marcus Reed. Marcus was standing near the espresso bar. His handsome face was entirely frozen in absolute, paralyzing terror. He was staring at Tara with wide, panicked eyes. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, the incredibly expensive crystal champagne flute Marcus was holding slipped through his trembling fingers. It hit the marble floor and shattered, the sharp, violent sound of breaking glass shattering the silence like a gunshot. Marcus? Sloane whispered. Her voice was incredibly small, incredibly fragile, completely unlike her usual sharp, confident tone. She looked at her husband, the man she had loved and defended against her family's subtle prejudices for years. Marcus, tell me you didn't. Marcus couldn't. He took a slow, terrified step backward toward the heavy oak door. I was drunk, Marcus stammered, his voice pathetic and weak. It was just one time after the gym holiday party. I swear, Sloane. I didn't know. The VIP ultrasound suite instantly exploded into absolute, unmitigated chaos. Sloane didn't cry. She didn't scream. She let out a guttural, primal sound of pure, unadulterated rage, lunged across the room, and grabbed Tara by her expensive, perfectly styled hair. Tara screamed as Sloane violently yanked her off the examination bed, dragging the pregnant mistress onto the polished marble floor. You bitch! Sloane shrieked, raining open-handed slaps down on Tara's face, while the younger woman scrambled desperately to protect her stomach. You slept with my husband? You brought him into my family? Sloane! Stop! Ethan yelled, completely paralyzed by the shock of the betrayal, unable to process the fact that his heir belonged to his brother-in-law. But the violence wasn't contained to the women. Grant Blake, the aggressive, arrogant golden boy, saw Marcus trying to quietly slip out the heavy oak door while Sloane was attacking Tara. Grant didn't hesitate. He charged across the room like a linebacker and violently tackled Marcus into the espresso bar. The massive espresso machine shattered, sending scalding water, coffee grounds, and broken ceramic mugs flying across the luxurious waiting room. You piece of shit, Grant roared, punching Marcus repeatedly in the face as they wrestled in the broken glass and hot coffee. You come into our family and you do this? I'll kill you. Victor Blake was screaming at his sons to stop. Camille was shrieking hysterically, entirely forgetting about her vlog, trying to pull Sloane off of a weeping, terrified Tara. Dr. Moss had wisely retreated to the hallway and immediately hit the emergency panic button, calling clinic security and the Boston Police Department. And through it all, the professional videographer Camille had hired was still standing in the corner, his camera rolling, capturing every single second of the Blake family's absolute, humiliating destruction in stunning 4K high definition. 10 minutes later, the elite Boston clinic looked like a war zone. 3 heavily armed Boston Police Department cruisers were parked aggressively on the sidewalk outside the clinic, their blue and red lights flashing against the pristine glass facade. Inside, the VIP suite was completely destroyed. 2 massive police officers were physically dragging a bloodied, furious Grant Blake out of the room in handcuffs. Another officer had Marcus pinned against the wall, reading him his rights after Marcus had desperately tried to punch Grant back to defend himself. Sloane was sitting on the floor, her dress torn, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Tara was sitting on the examination bed, surrounded by clinic nurses, hyperventilating and weeping, her face bruised from Sloane's attack. Ethan stood in the center of the ruined room. He looked entirely hollowed out. He had walked into this building thinking he was a king. He had abandoned his loyal wife and 2 beautiful children because he thought he was upgrading to a younger, more compliant model who was carrying his legacy. Instead, he had just discovered on high-definition video that his mistress had been sleeping with his sister's husband. His heir was a biological impossibility. His family was being arrested for assault in a maternity ward. Mr. Blake, a stern, unsmiling police sergeant, said, walking up to Ethan holding a clipboard. "We are arresting your brother for aggravated assault and your brother-in-law for mutual combat. We are also citing your sister for simple assault. The clinic is pressing charges for the property damage to the VIP suite. The bail and the immediate damages are going to be significant." Ethan blinked, slowly processing the words. The financial reality of the situation was starting to penetrate his absolute shock. I'll pay it," Ethan stammered, desperately trying to salvage some shred of his arrogant, capable CEO persona. "I can cover the bail and the damages. Just keep this out of the papers, please." Ethan reached into his tailored suit jacket and confidently pulled out his heavy, metal American Express Centurion black card. It was the ultimate symbol of elite wealth. It was the card Ethan used to buy Tara's expensive dinners, pay for his luxury gym memberships, and project the illusion that he was a highly successful, untouchable executive. He handed the heavy metal card to the clinic administrator, who was standing next to the police sergeant holding a portable credit card terminal. "Charge whatever you need to," Ethan said dismissively. "Just get my brother out of those handcuffs." The clinic administrator took the card, inserted the chip into the terminal, and typed in a massive initial charge of $25,000 to cover the immediate property damage and the police bail bonds. The machine beeped quietly, processing the transaction. Then, the terminal emitted a sharp, loud, incredibly negative BZZ sound. The clinic administrator frowned, looking at the screen. She pulled the card out and inserted it again. "BZZ, Mr. Blake," the administrator said, her voice entirely devoid of the deferential respect she had shown him an hour ago. "The card has been declined." "Declined," Ethan snapped, his arrogance flaring up again to mask his profound embarrassment. "That's impossible. It's a Centurion card. There is no limit. Run it again. The machine is broken." "The machine is functioning perfectly, sir," the administrator replied coldly, turning the screen around so the police officers could see it. "The transaction was blocked by the issuing bank. The error code states that the account has been permanently closed by the primary account holder." Ethan froze, the blood completely drained from his face. "Primary account holder?" the police sergeant asked, raising an eyebrow, looking at Ethan with intense suspicion. "I thought you said this was your card, sir." "It is my card," Ethan yelled, snatching the heavy metal card back from the administrator. "My name is literally stamped right here on the front. Ethan Blake." He didn't understand. He had used this card for 8 years. He had used it to fund his entire fake lifestyle. Desperate to prove he wasn't a fraud in front of the police, Ethan aggressively pulled out his phone, opened his banking app, and dialed the dedicated, ultra-exclusive Centurion concierge line on speakerphone. "Centurion Services, this is Michael," a polite, highly professional voice answered. "How may I assist you today?" "Michael, this is Ethan Blake," Ethan barked, pacing the ruined VIP room. "My card was just declined at a medical facility for $25,000. I need you to authorize the charge immediately and remove whatever fraudulent block is on the account." "One moment, Mr. Blake," the concierge replied smoothly. "Let me access the profile, the entire room." The police officers, Camille, Victor, and a weeping Tara, listened in absolute silence as the concierge typed on his keyboard. "Ah, I see the issue, Mr. Blake," the concierge said, his voice remaining perfectly polite, but delivering a completely lethal financial blow. "The transaction was declined because the account has been permanently closed and the credit line has been liquidated." "Liquidated?" Ethan screamed. "By who? Who closed my account?" "By the primary account holder, sir," the concierge explained simply. "Mrs. Nora Quinn." Ethan stopped pacing. He stared at his phone, his mind completely unable to process the words. "Nora?" Ethan whispered. No, that's my account. My name is on the card." "Your name is on the physical card, Mr. Blake," the concierge clarified, exposing the absolute, pathetic truth to the entire room. "But you are merely an authorized user on the account. You have no legal ownership of the credit line. no authority to access the primary funds, and no ability to reopen the account. Ms. Quinn closed the account and severed all authorized users approximately 45 minutes ago. Your card is now entirely worthless. Ethan stood in the center of the ruined, coffee-stained room, holding a useless piece of heavy metal. He hadn't been funding his lavish lifestyle. He hadn't been a highly successful executive projecting massive wealth. For 8 years, Nora, the starving artist he had relentlessly mocked, the woman he had just aggressively abandoned in court to save a few $1,000s in child support, had been quietly, completely propping up his entire financial existence with her massive hidden income. And now she had cut the cord. "The card is declined," the police sergeant repeated, breaking the suffocating silence in the room. He looked at Ethan with complete, unvarnished disgust. "If you cannot produce legitimate funds, Mr. Blake, your brother and your brother-in-law will be processed at the Central Precinct and held overnight until their arraignment." Ethan frantically opened his banking app, desperately trying to access his personal checking accounts to wire the money directly. But without Nora's massive, consistent income quietly flowing into the joint accounts she had meticulously emptied and legally separated the moment the judge stamped the divorce decree, Ethan's financial reality was catastrophically exposed. He didn't have $25,000. He barely had $3,000 in his personal checking account. His entire credit profile, the score that allowed him to lease luxury cars and project an image of massive corporate wealth, was completely synthetic. It was entirely built on the fact that he was attached to Nora's pristine, high-net-worth credit history. Now that he was severed, his true credit score plummeted. He was instantly reduced to a man with massive debt, a mediocre tech sales salary, and absolutely zero high-tier borrowing power. I can't pay it right now," Ethan admitted, his voice barely a whisper, looking at the police sergeant. Victor Blake, Ethan's father, stepped forward, his face dark with fury. He had just watched his family be completely humiliated. He pulled out his own credit card and handed it to the administrator, paying the bail and the damages with a look of absolute disgust. He didn't look at Ethan. He didn't speak to Tara. He just paid the bill to make the police leave. Grant and Marcus were unhandcuffed, given citations, and ordered to appear in court. The Blake family walked out of the elite maternity clinic in absolute, shattered silence. The vlog was over. The celebration was dead. The heir was a biological impossibility, and the Golden family was publicly humiliated. But the destruction of Ethan Blake was only just beginning. An hour later, Ethan pulled into the driveway of the massive, 5-bedroom suburban house he had fought so aggressively to keep in the divorce. He had demanded the house because he wanted to move Tara in immediately. Playing the role of the wealthy patriarch, he parked his leased sports car and walked up to the front door. Taped to the heavy mahogany door was a bright yellow, highly official legal document. Ethan ripped it off the door, his heart hammering in his chest. It was a formal notice of foreclosure from the primary mortgage lender. Ethan leaned against the door, feeling the world violently spin around him. During the marriage, Ethan had secretly taken out a massive, highly aggressive second mortgage on the house to fund a disastrous, deeply stupid investment in a volatile cryptocurrency scheme. He had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. He had been quietly paying the massive interest payments, using his authorized access to Nora's income. He had assumed that when he forced Nora to waive all child support and alimony, he would magically have enough of his own salary freed up to cover the fraudulent second mortgage before the bank noticed. He was wrong. Without Nora's income, and without her pristine credit score shielding him, the bank's automated risk assessment system had immediately flagged the massive debt-to-income ratio. They had audited the file, discovered the highly irregular second mortgage, and immediately initiated foreclosure proceedings. They had sent numerous warnings to his private email over the last 3 weeks, but Ethan had ignored them, entirely focused on his new mistress. He had fought to keep a house he couldn't afford, and now he was going to lose it entirely. He was going to be homeless in less than 30 days. While Ethan was standing on his porch, staring at his financial ruin, his mother was aggressively trying to wage a proxy war. Camille Blake was furious. She was humiliated. The story of the massive brawl at the VIP maternity clinic had already leaked to a local tabloid blog, and her social circle was buzzing with the scandalous gossip that her immaculate son had been cuckolded by his own brother-in-law. Desperate to deflect the blame and regain some shred of control, Camille decided to attack the person she hated most, Nora. Camille assumed that Nora was sitting in a tiny, depressing apartment, crying over her ruined life. She wanted to twist the knife. She wanted to destroy Nora's freelance doodle career completely. Camille found the corporate number for the massive, highly prestigious medical publishing firm in Boston, where Nora occasionally consulted. She dialed the number and demanded to speak to the director of human resources. "This is Camille Blake," she announced haughtily when the HR director answered the phone. "I am calling to formally report one of your freelance contractors, Nora Quinn. She is my former daughter-in-law. I feel it is my civic duty to inform you that Nora has recently suffered a severe mental breakdown during her divorce. Furthermore, I have reason to believe she has been stealing proprietary rendering software from your firm to use for her own pathetic little drawings. If you don't terminate her contract immediately, my family will be forced to alert the media." Camille smiled, expecting the HR director to gasp in horror, and immediately promised to blacklist Nora from the industry. Instead, there was a long, incredibly quiet pause on the other end of the line. Then, the HR director actually started laughing. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a deep, genuine belly laugh of absolute amusement. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Blake," the HR director said, struggling to catch her breath. "Did you just call Nora Quinn a freelance contractor? She draws pictures for textbooks," Camille snapped, her aristocratic facade slipping, highly offended by the laughter. "I am reporting her for theft and mental instability. You need to terminate her immediately." "Mrs. Blake, I couldn't terminate Nora Quinn if I wanted to," the HR director replied, her tone shifting to absolute, highly professional condescension. "Nora isn't a freelancer. She is the absolute benchmark of the international medical illustration community. Her surgical maps are currently used in 80% of the top-tier medical schools in this country. She is arguably the most brilliant anatomical artist of her generation." Camille fell silent, gripping the phone tightly. "And furthermore," the HR director continued, delivering the lethal blow, "Nora doesn't work for us anymore. We threw a massive going-away party for her last week. She was aggressively headhunted by the Caledon Medical Research Institute in Scotland. They offered her a 5-year, multi-million-dollar exclusive contract to become their lead anatomical architect. She flew to Glasgow this afternoon. We couldn't match their offer, and frankly, no firm in America could." The phone slipped slightly in Camille's hand. "Millions?" Camille whispered, her voice completely hollow. "Scotland?" "Yes, Mrs. Blake," the HR director confirmed cheerfully. "Your former daughter-in-law is a multi-millionaire, internationally recognized genius. And you called to accuse her of stealing software? That is genuinely the funniest thing I have heard all year. Have a wonderful day." The line clicked dead. Camille sat in her incredibly expensive living room, staring at the phone. Her son was financially ruined. The heir was a biological disaster. The family was a public laughingstock, and the woman they had relentlessly mocked and abandoned to starve had just flown to Europe with millions of dollars, taking Camille's only legitimate grandchildren entirely out of the country. The collapse of the Blake family accelerated with terrifying, absolute velocity over the next 2 weeks. The fallout from the maternity clinic brawl was catastrophic. Sloane, Ethan's sister, immediately filed for a scorched earth, highly aggressive divorce from Marcus Reed. She hired the most vicious family lawyer in Boston, froze all of Marcus's assets, and publicly accused him of adultery and extreme emotional cruelty. She kicked him out of their house and changed the locks the same day. Simultaneously, Tara Wells, realizing that Ethan was completely broke and that she was now entirely alone, did exactly what a gold digger does when the gold runs out. She hired her own aggressive lawyer and formally sued Marcus Reed for immediate paternity support. Knowing he was the only man involved who still had access to significant commercial real estate commissions, the overlapping lawsuits created a massive, highly public legal circus. A major national tabloid picked up the story, publishing the headline "Boston a light brawl in VI clinic. Heir apparent belongs to brother-in-law." The article detailed the entire chaotic scene, the police arrests, and the DNA revelation. But the tabloid scandal wasn't the worst thing to happen to the Blake family. Grant Blake, the golden boy who had aggressively tackled Marcus into the espresso bar, was officially served with a massive civil lawsuit for aggravated assault and battery. Grant was furious. He thought he was untouchable. He stormed into the boardroom of his highly conservative corporate finance firm, demanding his legal team fight the lawsuit. He claimed he was merely defending his family's honor. But a civil lawsuit involving a highly public, violent brawl triggers automatic internal reviews in conservative finance sectors. The compliance department at Grant's firm, a team of utterly ruthless internal auditors, immediately initiated a routine, standard audit of his portfolio to ensure he wasn't a reputational risk to the company. They didn't find a reputational risk. They found a massive, undeniable felony. During the audit, the compliance officers discovered a highly complex, heavily obfuscated trail of phantom vendors and offshore trusts attached to Grant's primary accounts. When they dug deeper, tracing the IP addresses and the wire transfers, they realized exactly what Grant had been doing for the last 3 years. Grant had been actively helping Ethan hide money from Nora. He had been embezzling corporate funds, transferring them through the phantom vendors, and funneling them into Ethan's secret cryptocurrency accounts to try and save Ethan from the disastrous second mortgage. The golden boy wasn't a brilliant financier. He was committing massive, systemic wire fraud to cover his brother's incredibly stupid mistakes. He had stolen nearly $500,000 from his own firm. The firm didn't hesitate. They didn't care about the Blake family name. 3 days after the clinic brawl, federal agents walked into the corporate finance headquarters. They bypassed the receptionist, walked straight past the glass walls of the boardroom, approached Grant Blake in the middle of a client meeting, and aggressively arrested him for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. He was fired immediately. His equity was seized. His entire career was completely, permanently destroyed. The social consequences for the parents, Camille and Victor, were equally swift and absolutely merciless. Desperate to escape the suffocating humiliation of the tabloid articles and Grant's highly public federal arrest, Camille and Victor drove to their ultra-exclusive, deeply conservative country club. They wanted to sit in the private dining room, drink expensive wine, and pretend they were still untouchable. They pulled their Mercedes up to the heavily guarded security gate. The security guard didn't raise the barrier. He stepped out of his booth, holding a clipboard, looking at them with a mixture of pity and strict professional detachment. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blake," the guard said, refusing to make eye contact. "The board of directors held an emergency meeting this morning. Your membership has been formally and permanently revoked due to violations of the club's moral and reputational conduct clauses. You are no longer permitted on the premises." Victor stared at the guard, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of purple. He had been a member of that club for 20 years. It was the absolute center of his social universe. "Do you know who I am?" Victor roared, slamming his hand on the steering wheel. "I do, sir," the guard replied calmly. "And so does the board. Please reverse your vehicle." They were completely, utterly exiled from the society they had spent their entire lives trying to dominate. Within a month, the Blake family was entirely bankrupt. The staggering legal fees from Grant's federal criminal defense, combined with the catastrophic collapse of Ethan's finances, completely drained Victor's real estate development accounts. The bank officially foreclosed on Ethan's massive suburban house, kicking him out onto the street. Unable to afford rent in Boston and completely stripped of their massive social status, the Blake family was forced to liquidate their remaining assets just to survive. Victor and Camille were forced to rent a double-wide trailer in a deeply depressing, run-down mobile home park an hour outside the city. Ethan, entirely broke, unemployed, and utterly humiliated, was forced to move into the tiny spare bedroom of the trailer with his parents. He had abandoned a brilliant, loyal wife and 2 beautiful children because he thought he was upgrading his life. Instead, he was 35 years old, sleeping on a lumpy mattress in a trailer park, listening to his mother cry herself to sleep every single night. But Ethan couldn't accept his defeat. His absolute, deeply ingrained narcissism wouldn't allow him to believe that he had lost. He needed someone to blame. He needed a villain. And he decided that the villain was Nora. He convinced himself that Nora had planned this entire thing. He convinced himself that she had somehow manipulated Tara, manipulated the DNA test, and stolen his children to punish him. He decided he was going to take his children back. He was going to use the power of the law to destroy her. Ethan sold the only valuable asset he had left, a vintage Rolex watch he had hidden from the bankruptcy courts. He used the cash to buy a cheap economy class, one-way ticket to Glasgow, Scotland. He didn't hire a lawyer. He didn't consult the courts. He just packed a single duffel bag, fueled by absolute, blinding arrogance. He was going to march into Nora's new fancy medical institute, invoke the Hague Convention on the civil aspects of international child abduction, and publicly accuse her of kidnapping his children across international borders. He was going to have her arrested by Interpol, take full custody of Milo and Ivy, and sue her for millions of dollars in damages. He thought he was a brilliant legal strategist. He was about to walk into an absolute, inescapable international meat grinder. Ethan Blake landed in Glasgow on a dark, violently rainy Tuesday morning. He was jet-lagged, wearing the same wrinkled clothes he had slept in, and radiating absolute, psychotic desperation. He didn't check into a hotel. He took a cab directly from the airport to the sprawling, highly secure, ultra-modern campus of the Caledon Medical Research Institute. He walked through the massive glass revolving doors of the main atrium, completely ignoring the security desk, and started marching toward the private executive elevators. "Excuse me, sir," a highly trained corporate security guard yelled, stepping directly into Ethan's path. "You cannot enter this area without a visitor's badge. Do you have an appointment?" "I don't need an appointment," Ethan screamed, his voice echoing aggressively off the high glass ceilings, drawing the attention of dozens of doctors and researchers in the atrium. "My name is Ethan Blake. I am an American citizen. I am here to arrest Nora Quinn for international child abduction. Call the police. Call Interpol. She kidnapped my children across international borders." The security guard didn't flinch. He didn't look intimidated. He simply tapped the radio on his shoulder. "Control. We have a hostile individual in the main atrium." The guard reported calmly, his thick Scottish accent completely unfazed by Ethan's dramatic American screaming. "Initiate lockdown protocol for the executive wing and contact Mr. Crow." Ethan stood in the center of the atrium, puffing out his chest, looking incredibly proud of himself. He thought he was causing a massive, highly damaging scene. He thought Nora was going to come rushing down the stairs, begging him to stop, terrified of the international legal consequences. He waited for 10 minutes. Finally, the private executive elevator dinged. The polished steel doors slid open. Nora didn't look terrified. She didn't look like a starving artist. She stepped out of the elevator, wearing a stunning, tailored emerald green executive suit, holding a sleek leather folio. She looked incredibly wealthy, completely serene, and absolutely untouched by his pathetic drama. Walking next to her was Alistair Crow, a highly distinguished, incredibly intimidating British barrister wearing a sharp, bespoke suit, holding a thick legal briefcase. Behind them stood 2 massive, heavily muscled private security contractors. Ethan pointed his finger aggressively at Nora. "You're done, Nora!" Ethan screamed, his voice cracking with desperate arrogance. "I've invoked the Hague Convention. You took my kids across international borders without my consent. You're going to federal prison, and I'm taking Milo and Ivy back to America today." Nora didn't speak. She just looked at him with an expression of profound, absolute pity. Alistair Crowe stepped forward. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just opened his expensive leather briefcase and pulled out a single, heavily stamped piece of American legal paper. "Mr. Blake," Alistair said, his voice smooth, cultured, and dripping with lethal legal authority. "Are you familiar with the specific statutes of the Hague Convention on the civil aspects of international child abduction?" "I know it means she's a kidnapper," Ethan yelled. "Actually, sir, it means nothing of the sort," Alistair corrected smoothly, taking a step closer. "The Hague Convention strictly applies only when a parent's legal custody rights are violated by the removal of a child. It requires the complaining parent to possess active, legally recognized custodial authority." Alistair held up the document. It was the final divorce decree from the Boston Family Court. "This is a legally binding, irrevocable waiver of parental rights," Alistair stated, his voice ringing clearly across the quiet atrium. "Signed by you, stamped by an American judge. In a desperate attempt to avoid paying child support, you voluntarily, permanently relinquished all legal and physical custody of Milo and Ivy Quinn. You have zero legal authority over them. In the eyes of international law, Mr. Blake, you are a complete stranger to those children." Ethan froze. The absolute, blinding arrogance instantly evaporated from his face, replaced by a sudden, terrifying realization. He had tried to use the law as a weapon, entirely forgetting that he had already disarmed himself to save a few $1,000s. "No," Ethan stammered, backing away slightly. "No, I'm their father. I have rights." "You have absolutely nothing," Alistair corrected sharply, pulling a second, highly official document from his briefcase. "Furthermore, because you have aggressively tracked my client across international borders and caused a hostile disturbance at her place of employment, I am executing this document." Alistair handed the paper to the security guard, who read it quickly. "This is an international, zero-tolerance restraining order issued by the High Court of Justiciary in Scotland," Alistair announced. "You are legally prohibited from being within 500 meters of Miss Quinn, her children, her residence, or her place of employment. By standing in this atrium, you are currently committing a criminal offense under Scottish law." Before Ethan could even process the words, the heavy glass doors of the atrium swung open, and 4 highly professional officers from Police Scotland walked aggressively into the building. "Is this the individual, Mr. Crowe?" the lead officer asked, looking at Ethan with absolute disgust. "Yes, officer," Alistair confirmed smoothly. "He is in direct violation of a High Court interdict, and he is trespassing on secure corporate property." The officers didn't hesitate. They didn't read him his Miranda rights, because he wasn't in America anymore. They simply grabbed Ethan by the arms, violently spun him around, and slammed him against the polished glass wall of the atrium. "Ethan Blake," the officer stated coldly, pulling out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "You are under arrest for breach of the peace, aggressive trespassing, and violation of a High Court interdict. Do not resist, or you will be charged with assaulting a police officer." Ethan didn't fight. He just sobbed. He was thousands of miles from home, completely broke, entirely stripped of his parental rights, and he was being aggressively handcuffed in front of the woman he had tried to destroy. "Nora, please," Ethan wept, looking back at her as the Scottish police dragged him toward the exit. "Please, don't let them do this. They're my kids. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Nora stood perfectly still, watching him being dragged away. "You should have paid your child support, Ethan," Nora said quietly. The police dragged him out the doors and threw him into the back of a waiting police cruiser. Ethan Blake spent the next 48 hours sitting in a cold, concrete holding cell in Glasgow. He wasn't granted bail. He wasn't allowed to see a judge. On Thursday morning, he was aggressively processed by the UK Border Force. They didn't put him on a commercial flight. They placed him in a secure, highly humiliating deportation transport, flew him directly back to Boston, and permanently banned him from ever entering the United Kingdom again. But the nightmare didn't end when he landed on American soil. Ethan walked out of the international terminal at Logan Airport, completely exhausted, carrying his single duffel bag. He was planning to take the subway back to the depressing trailer park where his parents lived. Before he even reached the taxi stand, a man in a cheap suit stepped in front of him and aggressively shoved a thick legal envelope into his chest. "Ethan Blake, you've been served," the process server announced cheerfully, turning around and walking away. Ethan opened the envelope with trembling hands. It was a massive civil lawsuit from the luxury car dealership where he had leased the expensive sports car for Tara. Because his credit score had completely collapsed when Nora removed him as an authorized user, the dealership had audited the initial lease application. They discovered that Ethan had wildly inflated his income and submitted highly fraudulent financial documents to secure the vehicle. They weren't just repossessing the car. They were suing him for massive financial damages and referring the fraudulent application to the district attorney for potential criminal prosecution. Ethan dropped his duffel bag on the sidewalk outside the airport and openly, pathetically wept. He had absolutely nothing left to lose. But Tara Wells, his former pregnant mistress, still had one final play to make. Realizing that Ethan was completely bankrupt and furious that she had been publicly humiliated in the maternity clinic, Tara decided to cash in on the only asset she had left, the scandal itself. Tara contacted the largest, most aggressive tabloid television network in America. She sold them exclusive rights to the entire story for a massive six-figure payout. The network aired a highly produced, incredibly dramatic one-hour special titled *The Blake Family Lies, Fake Heirs, Fake Wealth, and a VIP Brawl. The special featured highly emotional, heavily edited interviews with Tara, playing the tragic victim. It included leaked cell phone footage of the violent brawl at the maternity clinic, showing Sloan attacking Tara and Grant punching Marcus. It detailed Grant's highly public federal arrest for wire fraud, and it brutally exposed Ethan's fake credit score and his pathetic, desperate deportation from Scotland. The Blake family wasn't just ruined financially. They were completely, utterly annihilated socially. They were a national laughingstock. Camille and Victor Blake were forced to watch the television special from their tiny, incredibly depressing double-wide trailer. They had lost their massive suburban estate. They had lost their country club memberships. Their friends refused to take their calls. They were living off Victor's meager Social Security checks, entirely isolated from the world they used to rule. 3 weeks after the television special aired, Camille reached her absolute breaking point. Desperate, humiliated, and terrified of dying in poverty, Camille opened her laptop and drafted a massive 5-page email to Nora. It was a masterpiece of pathetic manipulation. Camille didn't apologize for treating Nora like garbage for 10 years. She didn't apologize for calling her a starving artist or for aggressively supporting Ethan's affair. Instead, Camille begged. She wrote about the importance of family loyalty. She claimed that Milo and Ivy would want their grandparents to be safe and comfortable. She explicitly asked Nora to wire them $50,000 to help them secure a proper apartment and hire competent lawyers for Grant's federal criminal trial. "We are family, Nora," T. Camille wrote at the end of the email. "We have to stick together in these dark times." Nora read the email while sitting in her luxurious, sun-drenched penthouse in Glasgow, overlooking the beautiful historic city. She didn't reply to the email. Instead, she instructed Alistair Crowe to set up a highly secure, legally monitored video conference call. The next morning, Camille, Victor, and Ethan huddled eagerly around the cheap laptop in their trailer, assuming that Nora was finally going to offer them a massive financial settlement out of pity. The video feed connected. Nora appeared on the screen. She was sitting in a stunning, high-tech executive office. She looked incredibly radiant, powerful, and entirely untouchable. "Nora," Camille cried, forcing a fake, desperate smile. "Oh, it's so good to see you. We've missed you so much. Please, tell me you received my email." "I received it, Camille," Nora replied, her voice perfectly calm and completely cold. "And?" Ethan asked eagerly, leaning closer to the camera. "Are you going to help us?" "Nora, I'm facing criminal charges for the car lease. Grant is looking at 10 years in federal prison. We need the money." Nora looked at the three of them. She saw the absolute desperation in their eyes. She saw the consequences of their profound, aggressive narcissism. "I'm not giving you a single dime," Nora stated clearly. The fake smiles instantly vanished from their faces. But you have millions!" Camille shrieked, her true colors instantly bleeding through the desperate facade. "You owe us. You were part of this family. I don't owe you anything," Nora corrected smoothly. "I was never part of your family, Camille. You made that incredibly clear for 10 years. You treated me like dirt because you thought my career was a joke." Ethan threw away his own children to save a few $1,000s in child support. You are suffering the exact, precise consequences of your own catastrophic choices. "Nora, please," Ethan begged, tears streaming down his face. "I love you. I made a mistake. Tara manipulated me. I want my family back. I want you back." Nora smiled. It was the coldest, most lethal expression Ethan had ever seen. "You didn't make a mistake, Ethan," Nora said quietly. "You made a choice, and you don't want me back. You just want access to my credit score." She leaned closer to the camera, delivering the final, fatal blow. "You were never my equal, Ethan," Nora whispered. "You were just a stress test, a temporary obstacle I had to endure to prove my own strength. I passed the test, and you completely failed." "Nora, wait!" Ethan screamed. Nora didn't wait. She reached out and ended the call, permanently cutting the Blake family out of her life forever. 6 months later, the international medical community gathered in Geneva, Switzerland. The grand ballroom of the highly prestigious medical conference center was packed with hundreds of the world's top surgeons, researchers, and biotech investors. They were all there to celebrate a massive, revolutionary leap in anatomical mapping technology. I stood on the brightly lit stage, wearing a sharp, tailored executive suit. I wasn't a starving artist. I wasn't a fragile, discarded wife. I held a pair of large silver scissors, surrounded by the board of directors of the Caledon Medical Research Institute. With a bright, genuine smile, I cut the heavy red ribbon, officially inaugurating the opening of the Quinn Institute for Surgical Mapping. The entire ballroom erupted into a massive, deafening standing ovation. I looked out at the crowd. I felt the absolute, undeniable power of my own success. I had built a legacy that would save lives, advance medical science, and secure my children's future for generations. I was Nora Quinn. I was whole, I was powerful, and I was completely, absolutely free. So, tell me honestly, in the comments below, if your arrogant husband aggressively forced you to waive all child support, completely abandoning your kids, just so he could afford to play house with his pregnant mistress, would you stay in the same city, fighting a messy, emotional court battle for pennies while his toxic family mocked your career? Or would you sign the parental waiver, quietly pack your bags, and fly to Europe with a multi-million-dollar contract, leaving him behind to discover that his new heir belonged to his brother-in-law, and that his entire financial existence was built on your credit score? Let me know. I read every single one.